Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today we got a couple of things to discuss, including a couple of signings, including a major one over in Vancouver. We got a couple of standings updates, some waiver updates, some injury updates, and a couple of trade rumors involving the Predators, St. Louis Blues, Vegas and Edmonton, some of the defensemen on the trade market, and Noah Hanifin. We'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video here at the Intent Hockey channel. Before we begin this video today, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never been able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below, and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below, as I would love to discuss it with all of you guys what was discussed in today's video. Now, as usual, I'm going to start today's video off by discussing a quick standings update here for the past couple of days. Lots of interesting standings updates. So as of March 2nd, 2024, the Florida Panthers in the Atlantic Division lead it with 84 points, followed by 84-point Boston, 76-point Toronto. Then the 83-point Rangers lead the Metro, followed by 78-point Carolina and 69-point Philadelphia. 72-point Detroit and 70-point Tampa are two wildcard teams. And they're followed by 65-point Washington, 64-point New York Islanders, 64-point New Jersey, 62-point Pittsburgh, 60-point Buffalo, 55-point Montreal, 53-point Ottawa, and 48-point Columbus. Those are teams that I was looking at right now in the Eastern Conference. Meanwhile, in the West, you have 81-point Dallas leading the Central Division, followed by 79-point Winnipeg and 79-point Colorado. You have 83-point Vancouver leading the Pacific, followed by 73-point Vegas and 72-point Edmonton. And then you have 70-point LA and Nashville in the two wildcard positions. And they're followed by 63-point Calgary, 63-point St. Louis, 63-point Seattle, 62-point Minnesota, 53-point Arizona, 47-point Anaheim, 35-point San Jose, and 35-point Chicago. And those are teams we're also looking right now in the Western Conference. So lots of interesting stuff over the past couple of days. As you can see, there's now a 7-point gap between the Preds and the Kings, and the Blues, Flames, and Kraken for the 8th and 7th and the 9th, 10th, and 11th spot in the West. So a really big gap there. The Knights are only 1 up on the Oilers and 3 up on the Kings, so they don't have very much of a lead for second in the Pacific. There's 2 points that separate Dallas to Winnipeg and Colorado, so that's a really tight race right now. Carolina is now only 5 back of the Rangers. Bruins and Panthers are tied for the East lead in points. The Red Wings are still in a really good position. The Capitals are surprisingly now only 4 points back of Philadelphia with 2 games in hand. So lots of interesting stuff there in the playoff races, and it's going to be interesting to see how those shake out over the next couple of days. But lots of interesting stuff there. Going over to a couple of signing updates here from the past few days. We have 3 ELCs to talk about and then 2 actual signings. So yesterday was the first day that some of these players over in juniors could have signed for next year. So some of the junior players have signed ELCs with NHL clubs. So that includes Milos Rollins, who signs with the Tampa Bay Lightning. He was an undrafted prospect. He's a center. He signed a 3-year, $950,000 AAV that will start at the beginning of next year. So far this year, in the QMJHL, he's put up 25 goals and 62 points in 55 games. Looks like he could eventually potentially be like a solid, maybe 4th or 3rd line center if everything works out well for him. So that's a really good sign there for the Bulls to sign a good prospect like him. Zach Funk, who's an undrafted winger, signed a 3-year ELC with the Washington Capitals as an AAV of $810,000, and he'll begin at the start of next year. Once again, he's been playing over in the WHL with the Prince George Cougars, putting up 56 goals and 99 points in 58 games with the team. So he's had a fantastic season. Maybe could eventually be something like a solid 3rd line winger. So that's a really good sign there for the Capitals. And then the Columbus Blue Jackets have signed Max McHugh, who was actually a 5th round pick of the San Jose Sharks back in the 2021 draft. He didn't get signed by the San Jose Sharks, so he signs a 3-year ELC with the Columbus Blue Jackets with an AAV of $950,000. Deal will begin once again at the start of next season. He's been playing over in the OHL, putting up 24 goals and 51 points in 53 games. So nearing a point per game over in the OHL has been a pretty good productive forward there too. So McHugh in Columbus, Rollins in Tampa, and Funk in Washington have all signed new ELCs, and they all get new contracts to start next year. So really good stuff there for those 3, and not exactly sure if they'll ever make the NHL, but those 3 I could see maybe eventually becoming an NHLer. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. Then we saw a contract extension for one of the lower players in the New York Rangers organization, as they signed left side defenseman Connor Mackey to a 2-year contract extension with the AAV of $175,000 and a deal beginning at the start of next year. So this is a really good sign there for the Rangers. Mackey has not gone into very much game action at the NHL level this year. Last year he was able to play in 30 games and put up 7 points with the Flames and the Coyotes combined. This year only has 1 game of NHL action, was a +1 and had put up no points, but looked really good in that game. And so far in 36 AHL games he's put up 11 points. He's been a healthy scratch at the NHL level a couple of times, so Mackey's looks like a pretty good depth defenseman, and the Rangers really liked him enough to keep him on a longer term basis, so that's a really good pickup there for the Rangers. Not going to say Mackey's going to be like an everyday NHL defenseman, but on a regular NHL team he could definitely be a solid 7th D. So not going to say he's exactly going to be a 7th D next year, but this is a really good sign there for the Rangers to add some more depth to their team long term. So a really good sign there for the Rangers to get Mackey locked up for the next couple of years, and that's a pretty good signing in my opinion. And then we saw one big one here just before I started to record this video. Elias Pettersson has signed his new contract. Now I was actually going to talk about this later in my video because there's been a lot of speculation about this over the past couple of days, so just talk about it right now. About, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, Frank Seravalli put out a statement saying that Elias Pettersson and his representatives were starting to talk contract and an extension was closing in with the Vancouver Canucks. But then Elliot Friedman made an interesting point, and he put out a statement saying how this was actually an interesting thing. I never even realized this, but the Canucks and Carolina Hurricanes were apparently talking about an Elias Pettersson trade. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the trade package was. I'm not sure what sort of deals were involved, but I've seen people say Svechnikov, I've seen people say Natchez, I've seen people say Jarvis, I've seen people say a first-round pick, I've seen people say Pesci. There's a lot of potential mock trades that I've seen that's linked a ton of players to the Vancouver Canucks, but it was apparently a serious enough offer that the Canucks took it to Pettersson and said, hey, listen, if you're not going to sign with us in the next little while, then we might have to trade you to Carolina, because they want this sort of thing to be done. I know Pettersson didn't want to talk contract in season. He said it was distracting, but the Canucks really do need to figure this out, and they really need to start structuring their cap long term. And that sort of got the ball rolling. Pettersson said talk to his agents, start to see if they could figure something out on a longer term deal, and that's what sort of got the ball rolling, which is why Frank Seravalli put out a statement saying that there's going to be some contract negotiations between the Canucks and Elias Pettersson to get a deal done. And it has happened now. Earlier today, just before I started recording this video, early on Saturday morning, Elias Pettersson was able to sign for an 8-year contract extension with the AAV of $11.6 million. Now, this deal also has a no movement clause for years 2 through 8, so he was not going to be able to have a no movement clause for the rest of this year or for next year, but after that he will have a full no movement clause. So that's really good stuff there. His qualifying offer was $10 million, so I knew it was going to be higher than that. I'm actually quite a little bit surprised they're able to get it this low. I thought he was going to be commanding north of $12 million, so to see him get just a smidgen above what William Nylander signed a couple of months ago, as he had 11.5, was pretty good business there for the Vancouver Canucks. And now they have their center locked up long term. Now, Pettersson has had a fantastic career. First season, he was able to put up 66 points. He replicated that in the second season. Then in 2021 season, which I'm pretty sure was a shortened season, he was injured a little bit. He only put up 21 points in 26 games. Then 2 years ago, he put up 68 points. And then last year was his best season up to date. He put up 39 goals and 102 points in 82 games. This year, with 20 games left to go in the season, he's already had 29 goals and 75 points. So there's very likely chance that he does potentially break the 100 point mark, depending on how well he does over the last stretch of games. But Pettersson's a fantastic top center. He's a very good player on this team. And as much as there's been some talk about should the Canucks trade him, should they keep him, he's a very fantastic piece of that locker room. And now that he's locked up long term, that's a major headache off the Canucks' shoulders. That's a major headache off Pettersson's shoulders. And this is going to be a fantastic deal long term for both these sides. I think 8 by 11.6, as much as that's now the 5th highest paid contract in the NHL up to this point, only behind Panarin, McKinnon, McDavid, and Matthews. I think this is a fantastic value, and to get him under $12 million, in my opinion, I think that's a pretty good piece of work for the Vancouver Canucks. So 8 years, $11.6 million, Pettersson's now locked up, and it seems in order to get that deal done right now, they need to have a potential trade with the Carolina Hurricanes that sent Pettersson to Carolina. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but now that Pettersson's locked up long term, all those trade speculations can go away, and Pettersson Pettersson is now a member of the Canucks long term. So very fantastic stuff there for the Canucks, and he'll be a fantastic Canuck player longer term. So really good signing there for the Canucks to sign Pettersson, Mackey to get an extension with the New York Rangers, as well as those other three youngsters in Columbus, Tampa, and Washington all getting new deals and signing contracts that'll begin at the start of next year. So really good stuff there. And hopefully all those guys are able to do well with their new contracts. So lots of interesting stuff there. Going over to a quick waiver update here from the past few days. Nothing really to talk about on the waiver update part of the video. We have one waiver update, and that was that Kyle Petersen, who we were talking about on Thursday, had been placed on waivers. He did indeed clear, so not too surprised there. He's making a $5 million cap hit for this year plus next year. Had an awful game against the Pittsburgh Penguins last Sunday, so there was not very many teams that were thinking who was going to pick him up. He's probably going to stay in this team's organization. He went down to the minors so the team could call up Felix Sandstrom, so they're going to run with the Urson-Sandstrom tandem for a time being, and now they have Kyle Petersen back in the minors. So interesting stuff there for Philadelphia Flyers. So now Petersen's back in the minors, and now he's cleared waivers. Not too surprised there. So that's the only waiver update we had over the past couple of days. Going over to a quick injury update for the past couple of days. Kent Johnson has an upper body injury and is going to be out for an indefinite period of time for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Andrei Burakovsky has an undisclosed injury and is out day to day for Seattle. Travis Hamonic has undisclosed injuries out week to week for the Senators. Mark Giordano has a concussion and is going to be out for an unknown period of time. Ty Emberson has an undisclosed injury, going to be out for an unknown period of time in San Jose. Cam Fowler has a face injury. Leo Carlson has an upper body injury, both throughout day-to-day period of time for the Anaheim Ducks. So some pretty bad injury that's there. But we also saw Nick Jensen in Washington, Artem Zub in Ottawa, Zach Bogosian in Minnesota, Hayden Fleury in Tampa Bay, and Nils Lundqvist in Dallas all be cleared to play and got back into game action in the past couple of days. So really good stuff there. And then we also saw Thomas Chabot have an undisclosed injury. He's going to be a game time decision for today's game action. Anton Forsberg has a lower body injury and is out for an period of time for Ottawa. Matt Grzelcyk and Justin Brazeau both have undisclosed injuries and are going to be out for a day-to-day period of time for the Boston Bruins. Timothy Liljegren has an undisclosed injury and is going to be a game time decision for tonight's game for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Mason McTavish has a lower body injury and is out for an unknown period of time. And then we also saw Calle Jarnkrok be cleared to play by the Toronto Maple Leafs, as well as Nikolai Ehlers, Sean Monahan, and Mason Appleton for the Winnipeg Jets. So really good stuff there, and hopefully those guys should all be able to get back into game action in the not just in the future. So interesting stuff there. Good to see guys like Chabot potentially get back into game action, Zoo be able to get back into game action, Nils Lundqvist in Dallas, Jensen in Washington, Jarnkrok in Toronto. Good to see all those guys get back into game action. But bad news to see guys like Grzelcyk and Brazeau in Boston be out, Forsberg be out in Ottawa, Fowler, Carlson, and McTavish be out in Anaheim, and Burakovsky be out for the Seattle Kraken. Hopefully those guys are all able to get back into game action in the not too distant future. And lastly here, going over to a couple of trade rumors from the past couple of days. Now first we want to talk about the St. Louis Blues and Nashville Predators, as these two things were both talked about on the 32 Thoughts podcast by Elliot Friedman. So we're going to start with the Nashville Predators. He thinks that the Nashville Predators, with their recent run, 7 straight wins, now have a 7-point cushion for second wildcard position, tied with the LA Kings for first wildcard position in the Western Conference. He thinks they're most likely not going to be sellers at this point in time. He does think that Barry Trotz is probably going to just leave the team most likely as it is, and just give that as a reward for how well the Predators have been playing over the past little while. So it seems like Saros is probably off the market, Carrier is probably off the market, Trenton is probably off the market. Now the two guys I do wonder, one is Novak. Elliot Friedman does think that Novak is probably the one guy who the Predators might still trade. He's a very cheap third line center. He's making $800,000, and he says that if they can't get Novak on an extension, given the amount of trade interest he could have as a very, very cheap center in a weak center market, he may still wind up trading Novak, just given the fact that if they don't get an extension, then he still potentially could be a very hot commodity. So that could be a potential trade that the Predators still make. I do still wonder about Tyson Barrie. There was a lot of trade speculation about Barrie earlier on in the offseason. He's been mostly a healthy scratch this year. He's also been a decent second pair of defensemen. I know that they could potentially run with him as like a second or third pair of defensemen, but I'm not sure if Barrie's really happy in Nashville. And I think if they were to really want to try and maybe make some adjustments to their lineup, they could potentially move Barrie. So I would still think that Novak, given what Elliot Friedman said about him potentially still being moved as a solid third line center for a couple of teams, and Barrie, given how poorly of a situation he was in earlier in the season. I think those two could potentially still be moved by Nashville, but Saros with a year left on his contract probably won't be moved, and Trenton as a solid third-line winger, and Carey as a solid third-pair defenseman I don't think will be moved anymore, so it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there. But I did see David Pagnotta recently on an NHL Network radio hit say that even though Saros may not be moved right now, he does say that they're still listening, but this was a couple of days ago, and he does think that if they don't trade Saros right now, he says the prayer of Askarov and wanting to have Askarov at the NHL level next year, he does think that Saros could be moved in the offseason. I think that's a possibility. Saros will be entering the final year of his deal, and they may want to have Askarov start with the reins in Nashville next year, so I think there's a very likely possibility that if Saros doesn't get moved this year, and it doesn't sound like it will be by a deadline, he's a very likely possibility to be moved around the draft or free agency, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens with Nashville. It doesn't sound like Saros is going to be moved anymore, or Carrier or Trenton, but I do still wonder about Barry and Novak, and we'll have to keep an eye on those two guys and see if they wind up being moved. But interesting stuff there for the Nashville Predators, as it seems like their recent hot stretch has sort of taken them out of the stellar conversation, so interesting stuff there. Also on the 30 Thoughts podcast, Elliot Friedman was talking about the St. Louis Blues, and he mentions that the St. Louis Blues are not doing overly well right now. He says that the Blues are really in a tough position right now, and he says that it's quite possible that after that loss to Edmonton over on Wednesday, that this team could easily potentially be sellers, which is what we were talking about in our last video on Thursday. It seems like St. Louis is most likely going to be sellers. Now he mentioned 3 names who are not UFAs who could potentially be moved in St. Louis. One is Buchnevich, we talked about this in our last video too. It's a really high asking price to acquire him, but Buchnevich is a really, really good player, and he thinks that there could be a couple of teams interested. He thinks the same sort of teams that are interested in Gensel could be interested in Buchnevich, linking teams like Edmonton, Vegas, Florida, and Carolina to them. The exact same teams he was mentioning are interested in Gensel, so it seems like those are probably the 2 highest wingers at this point in time, Gensel and Buchnevich. I'll have to wait and see exactly if those 2 are moved, and if so, where they go, but it sounds like Edmonton, Vegas, Florida, and Carolina could all have interest in Buchnevich, but it's a really high asking price for Buchnevich. It sounds like I think it was like 2 first-round picks or a first-round pick and an extremely good prospect for Buchnevich, so it'll be interesting to see if that's something that they could pull off, but it's a high asking price. We'll have to wait and see if Buchnevich gets moved. But 2 other interesting names that I didn't really mention in my last video who could potentially be moved were guys like Scott Perunovich and Brendan Saad. Saad has, I think, this year plus next year left a $4.5 million cap hit. I'm not exactly sure how many teams will be overly thrilled with a more veteran-y type player like Saad having a $4.5 million cap hit, so I wonder if teams will be willing to take on Saad if there was some salary retention in place. But Saad's a really good veteran type forward, knows what it takes to win in the playoffs, so I do wonder if there could be some teams interested in him. He also mentioned Scott Perunovich. Now Perunovich apparently needs to play in 14 more games, otherwise he becomes a UFA, so there's a potentiality there with Perunovich not getting into very much game action so far this year that maybe he gets moved. I think it's quite possible that Perunovich hasn't been used to the best of his abilities in St. Louis, so add those guys onto the thing. I would not be surprised, like I said in my last video, if Parayko's moved. You got the UFAs like Kapanen, Verana, Blay, Scandella as well, so the Blues are going to be a very busy team in my opinion before a trade deadline. I would not be overly surprised if this team did make a couple of moves before a trade deadline, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But Elliot Friedman does think that Buchnevich, Saad, Perunovich are a couple of names to watch out for, and the Blues, after their recent losses to Edmonton and to Winnipeg, are very likely going to be sellers at this year's trade deadline, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. Going over to Noah Hanifin, he also mentioned this on the 32 Thoughts podcast, talking about Noah Hanifin. Elliot Friedman does say that this is going to be an interesting situation to watch out for, and this was also mentioned on an insider trading video on TSN. So on Elliot Friedman 32 Thoughts podcast, he says that there's a very likely chance they could go to one of 2 directions. One, Hanifin is moved to a team he wants to go to, with like a Tampa or Florida or potentially a Boston, where he could wind up extending, and if they are able to get an extension in place too, that sort of helps Calgary with the deal, so that's a potentiality there too. Or the Flames look at the teams that Hanifin can block or trade to. If there's a team out there who offers them a really good package, even though Hanifin may not want to resign there, they try and move him there and see if they can get the best return they can. So those are sort of the 2 options there. They either move him to a place where he wants to go, or he can sign an extension and try and get the best deal out of that, or they move him to the team that gives them the best deal, and as long as Hanifin can't block it, they move him there. So it's going to be an interesting situation to watch with Hanifin. And on top of that, Pierre LeBrun on the insider training video did say that there was not very much news on that Noah Hanifin front on Thursday, and he said that there's a very likely chance that this is a situation that probably goes closer and closer to the deadline, potentially even on March 8th on the trade deadline, potentially when I'm doing my live stream video. So it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out with Hanifin, but it does seem like there's not too much news on his situation right now. It does seem like the Flames are asking for more than they did for Tanev for Hanifin, so probably looking at a first round pick plus. So it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for, but definitely a couple of options here for the Flames. And it doesn't seem like anything is close right now, but we'll have to watch out for this over the next little while. So some interesting stuff there for the Calgary Flames. And next, going over to a couple of defensemen. I haven't really mentioned this since the Tanev deal, but after Tanev and Buchnevich deals, there have been a couple of people who have been talking about the defensive market, saying how the Tanev deal really sort of structured the landscape for the defensive market right now. And for teams who are trying to get a first round pick out of a couple of players like Sean Walker and Matt Dumba, there's a very likely chance that those guys don't get first round picks anymore. There's a very likely chance that those two probably won't get firsts. Maybe they'll get seconds and a decent pick, but according to people in the Insider Trading video, they said those two, Walker and Dumba, were players that the Yotes and the Flyers were trying to get first round picks out of. Now after a Tanev deal, it seems a little bit less likely that'll happen. I'm not saying it's a guarantee it won't happen, but it's definitely a lot less likely right now. For Walker, they said if they aren't able to get a first round pick, they're in a playoff spot, they may not move him, so that's a possibility. On top of that, David Perunovich was recently talking about this too, saying how they haven't even begun extension talks for Sean Walker. Philadelphia has. Well, they have begun extension talks for Sealer, but they're a little bit surprised that Sealer wants above $3 million for the next 4 seasons on an extension, which is quite surprising. I think he's more of a $2.5 million defenseman, maybe not 3. So I think that's a little bit of a surprise in my opinion, but it doesn't sound like anything's going quickly with Sealer on a contract extension. So I'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but they may not get a first round pick for Walker, and if they don't want to let him walk as a free agent, they may have to sort of sell for like a second round pick plus a prospect. On top of that, they also mentioned Arizona and Dumba, saying how they could go the same sort of route they did with Nick Bjugstad last year, where they moved into Edmonton for a pick plus a prospect they really liked in Michael Kesselring. So if they could try and do that with Dumba, instead of getting a first, they get like maybe a second or a third and a really good prospect that they really are high on. So that's something that we could also see for Matt Dumba and the Arizona Coyotes. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But it does seem like after the Tanev deal, the market sort of shifted now, and these players, Walker and Dumba, who are potentially going to get firsts if Tanev got first, are most likely not going to get first now, and it's quite possible those two could wind up getting a little bit lower on the trade returns. So after we see exactly what happens there for the Coyotes and the Flyers, with some interesting notes there after the Tanev trade sort of set the market. And lastly, going over to the Edmonton Oilers and the Vegas Golden Knights. According to Darren Dreger on the Insider Trading video, these two teams could be looking to add the exact same sort of top 6 forwards. Now we know the Edmonton Oilers have been linked to adding a top 6 forward for a while now. We know after that loss to Vegas a couple of weeks ago, they really wanted to try and add some more forward depth to try and make it easier to roll 4 lines. They've been looking for a top 6 forward, potentially a second line winger to play with Leon Draisaitl. They've been looking at Jake Gensel, Jordan Eberle. There's some talk now they could look at Pavel Buchnevich, Tyler Toffoli potentially if he's available from New Jersey, a couple of other guys like Jason Zucker. But then the Vegas Golden Knights are in the same sort of predicament. Mark Stone's going to be out for the entirety of the regular season. They confirmed this on the Insider Trading video, and potentially the playoffs too. This looks like it's a really serious injury for Mark Stone, and he could be out for at least a couple of rounds for the Vegas Golden Knights. So interesting stuff there. But on top of that, they've been interested in guys like Gensel, Buchnevich, Eberle, Riley Smith from Pittsburgh, Zucker. I mean, they're sort of interested in the exact same sort of player. So it seems like there might be a bidding war between the Golden Knights and the Oilers to try and add some pieces. And it's still very likely, even though the Kings has shrunk the deficit behind the Oilers to 2 points and the Knights to 1 point, that the Oilers and Knights still have a first round series between each other. And those teams could definitely be looking to add some more forward depth, especially for Vegas if Stone's injured. For Vegas, with Stone being injured for the entirety of the regular season, potentially to the playoffs too, they can place this cap on long-term injury reserve and free up, I think it was around $9 million in cap space, so they can easily add a couple of those players. For the Oilers, they don't have that luxury. They can't add players on their roster because they have players in long-term injury reserve. They're right up against the cap, so they're going to have to be sort of a money in, money out thing, and that's led to speculation that they could trade guys like Cody Ceci, Brett Kulak, or Warren Foegele to make some sort of deals happen. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but expect the Oilers and the Golden Knights to be in on some of the same sort of players over the next week heading into the trade deadline. So that's what we're talking about for today. I'll let you guys thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. What do you think about Edmonton and Vegas? Could they try and look to acquire the same players? Could they be in on Buchnevich, Gensel, Eberle, a couple of other players? Definitely have to hear your thoughts on that. What do you think about the defensive market after the Tanev trade? Do you see Dumba or Walker getting first round picks, or do you think they're more likely to get like second round picks than a prospect? Definitely have to hear your thoughts on that. What do you think about Hanifin? Does he go to somewhere where he can extend, and do the Flames get a better return there, or do they try and just get the best return they can and move him somewhere where he might not want to go. So what do you think happens with Hanifin? On top of that, the Blues, do you see him being sellers like we talked about in the last video? Could you see him move Perunovich? Could you see him move Saad? Is there a possibility they could move Buchnevich? Definitely get your thoughts on that. And what do you think about the Predators? Is there a possibility you could still trade Saros or Carrier or Trenton, or do you think they're most likely going to be staying pat? And do you think they will still move Novak or Barry before the trade deadline? Definitely have to get your thoughts on all that. Plus, what do you think about the waiver updates, injury updates, the signings including the monster Pettersson extension, and the standings updates from the past couple days? Definitely have to get your thoughts on all that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk about today. Don't forget to stay tuned for my March 8th trade deadline video next week at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. So don't forget to stay tuned for that, as we'll be discussing all the trades that happen on trade deadline day. So don't forget to stay tuned for that. But that's what I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're related to subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support. I've never been able to do with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below discussing all the discussed in today's video. Also a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So if you check that out, I've been doing some more mock trades. Duclair potentially going to Florida, Everly going back to Edmonton. So definitely don't forget to stay tuned for that. And I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.